Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, October 13th, 2025. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary. Truly a historic day, and a day that I will remember forever, not only because of what happened last night and this morning. It is also my 23rd wedding anniversary and the 19th birthday of my daughter, Shiri. So the date, October 13th, already very much an eternal one in my head. Other people will remember this for being on the eve of Simchat Torah, the very holiday that on which the nightmare of the hostages began 2 years ago, ending with Simchat Torah happening tonight. It's tonight, right? It's tonight, tomorrow. It's tomorrow night.
Yeah,
but
tomorrow.
Yeah, basically, everybody in the speeches, Trump and Bibi, were all talking like it's Simchat Torah, so I'm going to go with that too. So that will be that will be how history records this, from Simchat Torah to Simchat Torah. But it has a remarkably personal effect. I'm very emotionally wrought up right now, so I don't know how the podcast is going to go. Well, I will have to rely on my less emotional colleagues, perhaps, to keep me in balance. Those colleagues, of course, being executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
I will say this: I'm not. My emotions are not wrought up because of the release of the hostages per se. There are some very moving videos, even as early as this morning, a couple of hours later, of them being greeted by their families and all of that, all of which are, enough to make, any person who is a monster dissolve into tears. My emotions were wrought up, to be honest, by the speeches that I just heard in the Knesset by Prime Minister Netanyahu and Donald Trump. And we can get into what is. Trump loves to call things historic and say that something has happened that has never happened before, and he'll say that about the Easter egg roll at the White House that he surveys if he has to. But the case that he made that something has happened that has never happened before, and the hour-long case that he made about what has happened course of his leadership, both in the first term and the second term, in the transformation of the Middle East leading to this moment that we are at now, was so overwhelming in its detail, in its self-confidence, and in the remarkably high good humor and contentment that he was displaying, which are not the usual blissed out tone that that's not a tone one associates with him. Just brought home to me what a miraculous alteration took place in the way the United States viewed this conflict in Israel and the Middle East with his his coming to power for the second time. And for those of us who view Israel as a providential nation and think that there is something going on here that surpasseth simple human understanding, it's very hard not to look at this moment, listen to the rhetoric that Trump deployed as he stood on the floor of the Knesset, and think that something providential happened with his election, unanticipatable, I think, and that has been crowned with glory, and not just the glory of getting the hostages back, which a lot of us didn't really anticipate would happen, the living hostages, but the nature of the overwhelming series of victories that Israel has scored over the last 2 years, some of them in spite of American hostility or discomfort, like the attack on Hezbollah and in Beirut in September 24. Some of it with grudging American support, like support for Israel's efforts to belay the Iranian attack on Israel's territory in October of 2024, and then some of it with the actual active, open, and proud participation of this administration in fighting against Iran, in destroying the Iranian nuclear program, in giving Israel the support it needed, and supporting Israel as it essentially relaunched the war in the last 4 weeks to provide the final push, along with the attack on Doha, to get Arab countries and Muslim countries and others to say we are done with this 2-year catastrophe that we decided we were going to support for a while, of Hamas's incursion into Israel and the attempt to delegitimize Israel through making these horrible, false, and slanderous and anti-Semitic claims about the purpose and nature of the war in Gaza, to this deal, and to the fact that the 20 living hostages, have been returned. I will go talk more in detail about the speeches and the feelings last night, but that's where I am. Seth, who is a devout Jew than I am, and a better Jew than I am, there are questions.
No such thing as better.
Yeah. Well, there's worse. I can name many worse Jews than I am. So I don't know if there's worse. There has to be better. But in the spirit of magnanimity, I will not name them here, though you've heard me name them many times before. But there is a controversy about doing what I'm about to do, which is say a prayer. A lot of people say you really shouldn't say it until the night of a holiday or the beginning of a festival or a particular kind of religious moment in which you gather together. It's called the Shehechianu prayer. So Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh, which is you say it means. Again, let's. I'm going to turn to you to help me get it right.
Essentially, brought us to this moment.
Yes, to thank God who has brought us to this moment. So where we can.
Parents did say it. Parents said it as they hugged their children last night, this morning, whatever we consider it. As the hostages reunited, there were a lot of Shehechianu prayers said at that time as well.
Yeah, and as I say, there is some controversy about whether or not that's kosher in some ways, because you shouldn't say it without a 10-person minyan, or there's various other ideas, but that this is what you say to thank God for bringing us to a specific moment, particularly a holiday, and if there were ever a moment at which to say a Shehechianu, this is the morning that when you at a time when you wouldn't ordinarily do it, this would be the morning to do that.
The other fun blessing question was Lahav Harkov of Jewish Insider tweeted that a member of one of the religious parties asked the Sephardic chief rabbi Yitzchak Yosef if, when he, meaning the member, this Knesset member from the religious party Shas, when he meets Trump, is he supposed to say the blessing that one says upon meeting a king? And the chief Sephardic rabbi responded, yes, because Trump has many of the powers of a king, but it should be said without God's name recited, because Trump wears regular clothes and his powers do have some earthly limit.
There you go.
So if you're wondering how we could turn any of this into a Talmudic, thing, but there you go.
There you go. So general thoughts and impressions of the last, really, it's like the last 5-6 hours.
This might sound odd, but it is just a general impression I've had. And it sounds odd because part of the reason we have been able to get to this moment is because Trump has taken a very transactional approach to this conflict, but all while remaining very close to Israel. But there was a sense, I mean, watching these hostages reunited with their families, obviously, like it just brought tears to my eyes. There was also, though, a kind of familial sense about the Knesset today when Netanyahu was speaking, when Trump was speaking. And there is something, and you're right, John, to note that he seemed more relaxed and magnanimous and happier than we've seen him in this term. And I think that's because it does feel like family. And he repeatedly talked about his love for Israel, his love for the Jewish people, how close we are, that there was a constant affirmation of that relationship. And that struck me as hugely important for a number of reasons. Obviously, going forward, because the really tough battle now begins. What happens in Gaza now? And, he left Israel on his way to Egypt. But there's also this question of how the world sees American power with its ally. And that debate will continue. And having Trump there with his daughter and son-in-law, who he also called out and praised for Jared's excellent work on this, at the same time that we're now getting these news reports about how for the last few years, a lot of these Arab countries have actually been coming to some behind-the-scenes agreements with Israel about military power. There's a lot of stuff moving right now, and he was the prime mover. And for that, he deserves to spend the next 24 to 48 hours basking in his accomplishment. It is a huge accomplishment, and it's nice to see him happy and enjoying it. And the love that the Israeli people have demonstrated for Donald Trump in the last few hours. I mean, there was a shot of as Air Force One was coming in on a beach. There was this wonderful, huge, mural thanking him. The front page of all the newspapers thanking him. It's a rare moment in a very hostile world to have everyone come together in this way, and I think it's worth appreciating that. And it's ironic that it's Trump, but it couldn't have happened without Trump.
Yeah, it's Israel's a country of Trump fans, and they've been, from their perspective, sort of speaking to him directly this whole time. They've been calling on Trump to do this or something like this, and they feel that he's responded to them, and he knows it. He is basking in it. They'll boo Bibi and cheer Trump over the same accomplishment.
I mean, the two are connected, obviously. One of the reasons that Trump is so, and to describe Trump as popular in Israel Trump is to Israel as Taylor Swift is to the 11-year-old Midwestern girl. I mean, that is who he is. But
they did put up a sign comparing him to Cyrus, which is the first time since Harry Truman that an American president has gotten the Cyrus comparison.
We should probably explain that. Cyrus the Great, of course, the Persian king in the 6th century BC, allowed the Jews to return from exile to the Holy Land, and has been a hero in Jewish history ever since, sort of the original, as you might say, the original righteous Gentile. And so people are forever, when they want to make analogies, are often looking to, hoping that an American leader of some sort will be the Cyrus, will play the role of the Cyrus. And even the ones that have been extraordinarily friendly toward Israel at various points in the course of their presidencies have never, when push comes to shove, achieved Cyrus-like stature in the eyes of Jews and of Israelis, because there are always competing factors. At some point in the course of what seems to be wholehearted support, there will be a pullback. Famously in 2006, when Condoleezza Rice, then Secretary of State, basically informed Ehud Olmert that it was time for the war in Lebanon to end after 32 days, because apparently 33 days was too many and 31 days wasn't enough, and left Israel in the position where, 18, 19 years later, they had to blow up individual members of Hezbollah by the thousands with their beepers in order to end a threat that they could have ended had America shown the kind of support for Israel in 2006 that it's shown over the course of the last couple of months. But that's the Cyrus analogy. But it's very important to note that Trump's popularity comes a little bit at the expense of Netanyahu, or is doubled and redoubled, because so many in Israel do not want to give Netanyahu credit for anything, and really, really dislike him, which is, we could mention, even though it's really not an important improvised moment toward the end of his hour-long speech, when all of a sudden Trump turns to Israel's president and says, why don't you give him a pardon? Give him a pardon. Come on, give him a pardon, because Bibi has been throughout his tenure as prime minister, has been dealing with a legal these. There are 4 cases now. There are really 2 cases against him, which and Trump is right to think that they are wildly similar to some of the trumped up charges against him. Funny moment that he said today was like, champagne and cigars, like, who cares about that? Because one of the major charges is that Bibi, who shows absolutely no signs of any personal financial corruption. I mean, he's been a major figure in Israeli politics for 45 years. I'd say 40 years. Various other including the aforementioned Ehud Olmert, went to jail for taking actual money from American fixers and the like. And Bibi was apparently gifted some cigars and some champagne by the film producer and former arms dealer Arnon Milchan, and that the fact that he handed him some cigars and some champagne, and I think Bibi doesn't really drink, so the champagne was something else, is deemed an act of, was considered a bribe. Apparently, it's a ridiculous charge. He's been going to courthouses, making court appearances in the last 6 months, 2 or 3 times a week, while he is the prime minister of a country at war. This is how deranged Israel's political system can be. One of the reasons that we have a system where we have determined that the president should not be tried for things unless it's by the Senate through the process of impeachment and potential conviction, that the president should not be tried for things while he's in office, because he's got a more important job to do. And Bibi really had a more important job to do here, and yet he has managed to do it while being distracted by this ludicrous set of charges, which are simply part and parcel of the Israeli left's effort to get rid of him, because they can't do it at the ballot box or get him out as leader of the leading right-wing coalition. So it was a pretty funny moment for Trump at the height of his popularity, with the entire Knesset, like in a 120 members of the Knesset, sort of in this worshipful affect, to make an ask. It's the only ask he made in the speech. He didn't say take risks for peace. He didn't say, can we have this, or I would like that, or he just said, give him a pardon. What am I asking?
This is his personal style. I mean, the other thing, the noticeable thing I saw is that, when they embraced, and he's like, he's a difficult guy, but he's great. He's a difficult guy, but he's great. I mean, he could have been describing himself, but the personal contact throughout the process of these negotiations is important. I was reading about how part of the reason Jared Kushner became so vital towards the end is that he and Steve Witkoff met with the representatives of Hamas. I mean, which was required by Hamas. Hamas wanted to see the personal reassurance of the president's son-in-law, a negotiator who would look them in the eye and say, yes, Trump is going to back up this plan and whatnot. And that, again, at a time where I think abstractions have flown about who's responsible for what, when, those personal details at the end, that's something Trump has always been very good at as a deal maker. And I think going forward, he now has this confidence about deal making, he was talking a lot about Tomahawk missiles being given to Ukraine, well, in the last 24 hours as well. So there's this sense of momentum. I think he will try to hopefully continue saying, well, I've solved this problem. Let's move on to the next one. And that's all for the good if you care about the future of Western civilization. But to me, it's those personal details that I think often undermine his domestic policy making, but in this context have proven invaluable.
Well, so go
I
ahead.
just want to say, in contrast to everything we're saying here, there is a different narrative that is being proffered on a lot of cable news or network news that I was watching this morning. The story is Trump got so mad about the Israeli strike on Qatar that that then pushed him to force Bibi into a deal. That is there's an inability among this huge segment of the American liberals who don't like Trump or Bibi to accept that this was the fruits of a very strong partnership.
Yeah, well, that's the daylight thing, right? Which has been demonstrated over and over again. If you want Israel to make certain sacrifices for peace, you show that the United States stands behind them. I mean, it's a very basic thing. But
we'll talk about the daylight thing for a minute, because you're making reference to the moment, a key moment in American history, just after Barack Obama won his commanding election.
So Barack Obama was elected, he took office in 2009, and he had a meeting with American Jewish leaders, and he said the policy of no daylight, which is where the U.S. and Israel, obviously, the metaphor I think is clear, but no light get through the cracks, no cracks. He said the policy of daylight, what has it gotten us? It's gotten us no peace. It didn't solve the conflict. So essentially, maybe it's time for some daylight. It's time to separate and try something new. And then the American Jewish leaders were pretty, I think, shocked to a man, who were, the ones who were there, that the president would say that to them, knowing, and I think this was his intention, that it would be leaked, that it would get out, that Obama said this, and that it would make the point that he wanted to make. But Obama's belief in the fact that daylight hadn't gotten any peace-related accomplishments wasn't even correct, right? I mean, you had the withdrawal from Gaza and parts of the West Bank under, of all people, Ariel Sharon, with the support of George W. Bush. But you've had right-wing governments in Israel make peace forever. The Begin government has struck the biggest peace deal ever, right? Netanyahu had his own handshake with Arafat over moving, IDF out of Hebron. I mean, right wingers make peace, but the larger point was that it was immediately reversed when Trump came into office, and it worked. And so each time, right, and then Trump came into office,
well,
and right away focused.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a very important
point. He focused immediately on Israel stuff because of what was going on at the UN during the transition, the presidential transition, when the Obama administration allowed that anti-Israel resolution to go through. And so he became embroiled in the Israel stuff and the question of daylight immediately.
Right. So what's so important about this is that Trump not only said that, he was going to try a policy of daylight, but also that Israel needed some tough love, because it wasn't grasping its need to, as diplomats seem to say to Israel and to no other country on earth, that Israel really needed to take risks for peace. Risks for peace. Sure, it was a risk. Sure, it's a risk to make a deal with people who created organizations, the purpose of which was to slaughter Jews, push Jews in wheelchairs into the ocean off a cruise ship, kidnap them and kill them at the Olympics, all that. But you know what? You should take a risk, because peace is so good. Take a risk. And the Obama administration detailed really remarkably, page by page, in Michael Oren's memoir of his time as the U.S. ambassador from Israel, the Israeli ambassador to the United States during the Obama administration. It was like there was a lot of tough and there was no love. The coldness, the chill, when Hillary was Secretary of State and yelled at Netanyahu on the phone, when Kerry was Secretary of State and yelled at Netanyahu on the phone, and when they actually took these acts, most notably the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, which they believed Israel should come and thank them for, enshrining the fact that Iran was going to be allowed to have nuclear weapons at the close of the deal in 10 years or 12 years, or however you were going to calculate it, from 2015, that Israel is supposed to be thankful for this. And Trump came in and he appointed an Orthodox Jewish ambassador, his former lawyer, David Friedman. He had his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, as a key ally, a key aide, someone with a Zionist upbringing, also an Orthodox Jew. And basically from that moment onward, the idea was, we're on Israel's side. We're not an honest broker. We're not looking to be, to sort of like mediate between the parties and see what we can do is say, well, you have this grievance and you have that grievance. It was like, Israel's our ally. Israel is a Western democracy in the middle of Israel, and we have all these commonalities. And we not only side with Israel, but we love Israel. That had never happened before. And the accomplishments, there were things that Trump then did, which he mentioned this morning in his speech, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the annexation of the Golan Heights, which Israel had done in 1981 or early 1982. So it's been more than 2 generations that Israel has not only claimed sovereignty over the Golan Heights, but like built an entire community of 150,000 who live on the Golan Heights, who make wine on the Golan Heights, who farm the Golan Heights, who have factories on the Golan Heights, doing all that. And then what was the long-term consequence just in the first term? It was the most innovative form of new diplomacy the world had seen in decades, which was the Abraham Accords, alliances, or peace treaties, or whatever you want to call the deals between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and various other countries to normalize relations between the Jewish state that these countries had refused to acknowledge would exist in permanence, or refused to acknowledge that it should be deemed a state among the nations and an ordinary state. Huge accomplishment. It's frozen in place by the Biden administration. Not that it didn't want to pursue it, but see, there was this fact that Saudi Arabia had killed one guy. And yes, I'm now going to say it was terrible. What a terrible thing they did. And they took him, and he was in the embassy, and he was living under he was living under the sort of American umbrella because he lived in Virginia and he wrote for the Washington Post. And he was also a member of the Muslim Brotherhood and a horrible anti-Semite and a disgusting columnist who wrote loathsome things about Israel and the Jews. But yes, it's a terrible thing that he got murdered the way he got murdered in the at the Saudi consulate in Turkey, and the entirety of American foreign policy and its goal of achieving a new kind of peace in the Middle East was upended in order to suck up to the forces in the Democratic Party on the left who decided that they were going to make a huge deal out of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And why did that happen? Looked at from a historical vantage point, because the people who really wanted us to have daylight, with the Saudis, while the Saudis were rushing toward us, right? Rushing toward the West for the first time in, 100 years, trying to build a city and, like basically de-Muslim brother, defundamentalize themselves in the person of this reckless and imprudent, but still quite visionary new leader. They wanted to stop it in its tracks. They actually, the ultimate guiding purpose was to end the Abraham Accords, was to end the idea that Israel should be making separate pieces outside of a peace with the Palestinians, that it shouldn't happen. And then when the Biden administration decided, it would be really good, let's try to reignite these Abraham Accord things. That would be good. Like, it was about a year in 2022, the Saudis were like, we can't trust you. What kind of friends are you? Like, I don't want to deal with you. Let's see what happens let's see what happens in the next couple of years and how things go. So
and just to add to that, I was reminded, someone sent me a reminder that again, we've said this many times, but it's worth repeating because we are at a historic moment. If Kamala Harris had been president, look at how she was treating Israel as vice president. She wouldn't even meet with Bibi. Every time she was asked about Israel's security, she talked about the Palestinians. It was not, this never would have been possible. And the other thing that I think Trump said in his speech that I think is worth noting is the way he thanked the IDF. Because, as I said, he's off to Egypt. The really difficult part of what happens now that the hostages are home begins, and that will require still some form of military presence along Israel's border. And his words for the IDF, I thought, were a vindication of what you were saying last week, John, which is that Israel has to win. And it seems to me that Trump's acknowledgement of the role of the military there is a good sign that he understands that as well. And that's really important going forward, because there are going to be a lot of clashes about the role of the IDF, how far into Gaza it should stay, where the security zones are and whatnot. And so I think all of us should be incredibly grateful for the IDF for bringing the hostages home and obviously for so many of the families who lost loved ones who were in service.
And I thought of Abe last year when we did our year-end show, and we did Person of the Year. Abe, I think the IDF soldiers of the men and women of the IDF were your for that reason.
Listen, the 4 weeks that preceded the Trump Witkoff brokered multi-nation acceptance of the 20-point peace plan had two faces, aside from Witkoff and it going. Like, one was the Israeli strike on Doha, which, if you read the American press, you were talking about like cable television, Abe, read the American press this weekend. So one of the many, many reasons why nobody really needs to pay attention to the American media, or most media, when it comes to describing this conflict, because this thing that they attempted to do, which was to say that the strike on Doha split Bibi from Trump, like then said, okay, we got to stop this now. Got to stop it now because, that's bad. Strike in Doha happened at the same time that Israel had recommitted its forces to taking Gaza City, the one place in Gaza that had been left mostly unmolested, in part, I think, as we're now going to find out, or the little pieces of information have already been trickling out this morning, that they knew that there were a lot of the hostages were there, and that they therefore had to move gingerly because they did not want to be implicated, did not want to harm the hostages. And so for almost 2 years, they let Gaza City alone for the most part. Israel went aggressively into Gaza City and it hit Doha. And 4 weeks later, the hostages are home. The war is over. Trump has said that Israel won the war. He said today that Israel won this war. And he said, you should be happy with Bibi Netanyahu. You're a very popular guy, which is not really true, because you know how to win. You know how to win. For the first time in our lifetimes. For the first time that I can think of since George H.W. Bush in his 1992 State of the Union said, "With the grace of God, we won the Cold War." A Western leader has stood up before the world and said, a Western country has won a war. Did we say it about Iraq? No. We said mission accomplished. Did we say it about the war on terror? No. Did we say it about did we say it about even the war against ISIS? No, we've never said we won. We win. This is victory. Trump's speech was a victory speech. Bibi's speech was a victory speech. We have not heard a victory speech from a Western leader in more than 30 years. There's a transformative quality to this. That's why, as I say, I'm so sort of like I'm overwhelmed. I just want to quote like just 4 or 5 lines from Trump's speech. Okay? He said of Bibi, he's not easy, but that's what makes him great. Right? I love Israel. I'm with you all the way. Said of what happened to Iran, didn't they take a big hit? Boy, oh boy. And then he said, when people say to me, oh, sir, the Iranians are going to try to reconstitute their program, their nuclear program. He's like, come on. The last thing they want to do is dig holes again. They're not reconstituting anything. Then he said, look at the map of the Middle East, and there's this little country. It's like a dot. Look at a map. It's like Israel. It's this little dot. And think of what you've done. It's incredible. Okay? You're a very popular guy, he said to Bibi after he asked President Herzog to pardon him. He said, you're a very popular guy. You know why? Because you know how to win. Israel, and the reason that the tribute to the IDF is so important is because he said, you have won this war. Trump used this phrase, by force of arms. You won this war by force of arms. It was the last push into Gaza City that broke the back of Hamas and its backers.
You know what we also didn't have to witness this time were the showy propaganda style Hamas celebration handovers of the hostages. That didn't happen this time either. That's another sign that it was a much clearer win.
Right.
And I was grateful mainly for the families. They did have video calls with them before they were released. Yes. But that also didn't happen in that horrifying way.
There was the last chilling moment for the hostages, or for us, thinking about what it means. This phone call between one of the hostages and his parents, and standing behind him, and you could see it on his mother's screen, is this entirely black robe, with a black hood on, Hamas ghoul. It's like having the devil in the shot while he says, basically he's saying, Ima, I'm coming home. And there is this last moment when he is still in the shadow of so it looks like a demon. It looks like there is a demon standing, and there was a demon, and they were in hell. They were in a worldly version of hell. They have been released from that hell because they won, not because they negotiated. And sorry to become a ranter again, but there's this thing over the weekend where people are saying, well, couldn't we have had this deal a year ago? There was this deal. There was a deal in the June of 24, and there was a negotiation over it. And of course, Hamas kept rejecting the deals. And why was that the case? Because Israel hadn't won the war yet. They still had freedom of movement in various places in Gaza. They had control of the hostages. They had the support of Qatar. They had the support of Iran. Things didn't look good for them. I mean, you can't say that everything was going their way. Nothing was going their way. But they kept saying no. And why? Because the sequence was wrong. Everything was flipped on its head. It was, you know what? Here's the idea. We'll ceasefire first, because that's maybe that's the sugar cube for Hamas. And then we'll talk about maybe getting half the hostages out first. And then in a second phase, after 60 days of a ceasefire, maybe we can start talking about getting a few more out and a few more out, right? The sequence was wrong.
Right. I mean,
Hamas
that's
is
the
not
thing.
going to
Just to be
bow.
clear,
Yeah.
like the claim is, the way people say it is, this deal in some form has been available since. And that's, yeah, in some form, a completely different deal. Like the hostages didn't come home on day one.
But
That's a
there was
different
always
deal. Like, well, some form, it's like the details were different and all the timelines and everything were different. But it was a deal. Like, the only thing they two had in common was that they were both deals. This is a very different deal. And also, I don't think people even, I don't think it has settled in how much of an accomplishment it is to strike a deal with Hamas's backers, wherein Hamas handed over every single living hostage at the moment, at the dawn break of the deal. In February, 2 hostages were released that were taken 10 years ago. They had wandered in to Avram Mangitsu, I think his name was. There was an
Yeah.
Ethiopian boy and a Bedouin who had wandered basically into Gaza. They were held there for a decade. And so, Israel went into this. They didn't start the war not having any hostages in Gaza. Like, having Hamas holding hostages is the default. It's like the status quo. For a decade, there have been hostages. There were just many more of them. Those hostages were released in February. All the living hostages were released today. So for the first time in that period of time, there's no living hostage in Gaza. And that came through this deal with Trump and Bibi. And I think people need to
Through,
understand the
but
magnitude.
right,
But
right.
there,
And
I
through
just I want to
force of
clarify
arms.
one thing, because John, the reason that you
Yeah.
are hearing all of these, well, they could have had this deal before. Why not? Why not? That is an effort to obscure the fact that there has always been a deal on the table since October 8th. Return the hostages. We won't. The war's over. There's no war. Like, you took our people, bring them back, and we're done. And that has always, Israel has consistently said, you return the hostages, then everything stops. And they would never return the hostages, obviously. And I think that people forget that. I think in part, Seth, because you're exactly right. That's exactly how they've operated for decades. But that's where I think the silence of Western media in particular, and a lot of supposedly pro-Palestinian, but actually pro-Hamas types in this country, their silence today is pretty deafening. A lot of them were saying they'll return the hostages and Bibi will start bombing the Palestinians again. It's a genocide. They have nothing to say now because Israel held up its terms of the deal. You return the hostages, we're starting over.
I want to go back to the force of arms thing, because there was this moment 2 months into the war. I was in Israel when it happened, or actually a month into the war, a month into Israel's moving aggressively on Gaza, when Hamas waved the white flag. They had a ceasefire deal. There was a ceasefire, and 80 hostages came out over the course of a week. And there was this whole question of whether or not you would get these hostages out, and then the ceasefire might be extended as they move to a phase 2, which would involve the release of more hostages. And people who were not part of the consensus that said, just give us back our hostages and we'll end the war, who said we have to extirpate Hamas completely. We've had 15 years of their depredations against us, rocket firings against us, and all of that. We cannot live with them on our borders, particularly after this. We do need to fight this war and win it. But had Hamas again unilaterally chose to end that ceasefire that got 80 hostages out. What was key about that ceasefire? They were pummeled. There was an assault on them, the likes of which they had not experienced before. They had only experienced Israel slapping down missiles and then making these kind of like boutique raids during the 3 major incursions that Israel made into Gaza in response to thousands of rockets being fired. They were pummeled, and they were on their back. They were like in shock, and they basically waved the white flag, took a breath for a week, and then said, nah, that's it. So first indication was kick the crap out of them and they come to the table. Then that happened. They went back to the battlefield. And then who started interposing themselves between Israel and the Palestinians and the advancement of the force of arms goal of killing off Hamas also as a means of getting the hostages back? The Biden administration. The Biden administration started saying, you're going too far. There's too many what? Oh, Chef Andres doesn't feel safe as he's making his, ratatouille from World Happy Kitchen. You're not making them feel safe enough. And why aren't you being nicer to the UN? And we're going to withhold some weaponry from you. And Bibi, having figured out that the last thing he could do was agree to daylight, to be a participant in creating the daylight between him and the United States. They were running in the other direction, and he was like the guy in a caper movie who handcuffs himself to the other guy to make sure he couldn't run away from him. That was what Bibi was doing with the Biden administration, which effectively lengthened the war by a year or more by restraining Israel, when the thing that we have now learned without question is let Israel loose and the war will be over. I don't think it would have been that quick, because you really did have to have the Hezbollah operation and then the taking out of the Iranian nuclear program to mean that whatever other fronts might fight and come into the war were incapacitated. The exception of the Houthis, who are too far away to make a measurable difference. But nonetheless, they made it longer by their discomfort with martial solutions to an actual attack on a country, a sovereign country, by this pseudo-sovereign, terrorist-run brigand nation called Gaza. And all of that, I mean, the lesson for future conflict, Trump seems to be learning, because, as you said, Christine, suddenly he's musing about giving Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. And this started 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. He started saying, you know what? I don't trust Putin. Yeah, I gave him all these chances, and he's like, yeah, he's not doing the right thing. And he's looking and saying, I just had this huge success.
Yeah, nothing
Backing
succeeds like success.
an inventive and clever ally that does interesting things that are new. Maybe I've backed the wrong horse here. Maybe that negotiated peace isn't going to work with Putin. We need to bring him to the table through force of arms. And I really enjoyed participating in the Iran strike. That was the other thing about this speech. He was like, that was so much fun. And there's Raisin Cane there. They said to me, sir, we've done these drills on Iran 3 times a year, but they were all too chicken to do anything about it. I'm like, you know what? Fly 37 hours. We have all these tankers in the sky. We'll refuel all of our guys. They'll go 37 hours. They'll bomb. They'll come back. It was great. It was fantastic. They were home for breakfast. Happy. Like a happy experience doing something righteous, which was taking an evil regime and removing its ability to project its power with the world's worst weaponry, beyond its borders. And now that's a lesson. That's why deterrence works. That's why this is.
And it countered for Trump and his administration. It countered a very important complaint that had been made by people on the other side of the issue, which was that if you do this, Israel is dragging us into a war. And it was proved to be false. Trump is happy in part because he trusted his gut right on this. The military said, we can do it. We can do the mission. We can succeed. And so he said, go ahead and do it. But it was also a rebuke to the idea that Trump, Trump shouldn't be thinking about this sort of thing. Trump's being manipulated, and he's getting tricked into showing American power and all this other stuff. All of that disintegrated in a moment. And it's no longer an argument that holds any sway over Trump. Yes, it's an argument within the Republican Party that's going to go on. But Trump is this argument was settled for Trump. He cannot be pulled in that direction anymore by saying, oh, they're just trying to pull you into a war. Because he knows he ordered the bombers, right? And then he said during the 12-day war, he decided 12-day war is over. Israel, turn those bombers around, right? Turn those planes around. And Israel turned planes around and sent them back. And Trump was like, this idea that I'm being manipulated is ludicrous. I'm literally pulling planes out of the air. I say it and they do it 6,000 miles away. It's amazing. So that was a key thing also for Trump, which was it gave him this sense of control.
The other thing is, because you're talking about a struggle that we know is going on inside the administration and inside the Republican Party and inside the question of the future of the Republican Party, both domestically and in terms of foreign policy. And that's why it was also very pregnant and very meaningful this morning that he spent a minute giving a shout out to Marco Rubio, whom he said will go down in history as the greatest Secretary of State of all time. Why is that important? This week we are closing our November issue, which is, by the way, the 80th. It marks the 80th anniversary of Commentary's existence. And we have a piece in that issue by Meir Soloveichik, who is our monthly Jewish commentary columnist, the rabbi of Shereth Israel here in New York City, the head of the Strauss Center at Yeshiva University, sort of the foremost, I don't know what you call him, the foremost Orthodox American intellectual of our time. And his piece is about a speech that Rubio gave in September, if you remember, marking the opening of the Pilgrim's Path, this incredible, Seth wrote about this very well, incredible excavation that occurred just outside 800 yards from the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall, when they were excavating to the city of the Temple of David, or the city of David in East Jerusalem, and they stumbled across this tile and realized that they had found this path that was the path that the pilgrims who came to do sacrifices at the temple would have to walk to get onto the temple grounds. And on the course, on their way there, they would have to go through these pools to purify themselves, because the temple was a place of purity and you could not enter the temple grounds without having gone through a ritualized purification. And so this is one of these, landmark findings in the history of archaeology, and particularly in the history of the Middle East, and the proof of the eternal existence, or the near eternal existence of Jews in the Holy Land. And Rubio was there for the opening, for the sort of official opening of the Pilgrim's Walk. And Meir Soloveichik had described the speech that he gave there as one of the most important in American history, one of the most meaningful speeches in recent memory, the Pilgrimage Road, in which he likened Israel to the United States, and the continuity between Israel as a land founded on an idea, or idea is a very limited way to describe a sort of mandate from the Almighty. But the United States was founded, as Rubio said, on the very powerful principle that the rights of mankind come from their creator. And he said this: the Secretary of State of the United States, quote, "To stand here today on the very road where not 2,000 years ago so many from everywhere ventured to fulfill that desire to be closer to the Creator is a humbling and honoring experience. As you go through the layers of history, you realize that all of the civilizations that conquered this city, all the ones who tore it down and built on top, are all gone. The Roman Empire is no more, nor any of the others that sought to conquer and rule this land, but one people remain. They have returned, for God's promise is eternal, and it is perfect, and his word is always true, and I'm honored to be part of its fulfillment here with you tonight. The Secretary of State of the United States endorsed an essentially religious idea about the continuity of Israel as a God-given right. He is not a Jew, right? He is a Catholic, but he believes that the testaments are, he believes in the two testaments and their essential connection and the truth and the God-given nature of what Christians call the Old Testament. And such a thing has never happened before. It's the most Zionist thing that has ever been said by any American politician, any American executive branch official ever.
I think we should. So
yeah, and he is in a fight inside the administration. Has been in a fight with the vice president's office. So yeah, please.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to say.
Rubio.
The entirety of this is a win for the pro-Israel camp within the administration, as opposed to the Israel-weary, arm's length, the Vances and whomever else. They'll say some positive things about Israel, but very cautious about taking any steps to actually do anything to show legitimate, concrete support for Israel. And this, you see the payoff in having done that here is enormous. So they have won. That's another. I mean, it's a much smaller win than Israel and America's, but they won it.
You can say it's a smaller win, and Sully would tell you that it's a bigger win. That is to say that an acknowledgement by the lead diplomat of the United States that there might be a transcendent purpose to Israel's existence that surpasseth understanding and is not simply a matter of negotiating treaties and being even-handed when dealing with, countries that have a lot of oil and that sort of thing. I mean, the State Department was the locus of anti-Israel sentiment in the United States government for going on, 78 years now? I mean, it is 77 years. It was George Marshall,
Truman versus the Striped Pants Boys, right?
The Striped Pants Boys. George Marshall, the Secretary of State under Truman, was deeply hostile to the idea of recognizing Israel's creation. And we go through, secretary after secretary after secretary after secretary, including, there are secretaries who decided after having been betrayed or screwed by the Arabs, most notably George Shultz, who was the Secretary of State under Reagan, that, Israel could be trusted and the Arabs could not be, and Jordan could not be, and the PLO was evil in killing Americans, and maybe we should make sure that we didn't try to make some kind of a parallelism between the Jews having their own state and the Palestinians having their own state, when the Palestinian state was going to be a focus of anti-American and anti-Israel terror. Nonetheless, and that speech would not have been given without Israel fighting. In other words, like, that recognition of Israel's transcendence is in part the fact that Israel took a look at where it was on October 7th after years of what now appears to be willful blindness or refusal to accept the kind of struggle that it was actually in, however you want to look at it, and said, if we are not for ourselves, who will be for us? If not now, if not now, when? We have to go and fight for our very existence and establish that we are here to stay. And just as Trump said about Iran getting hit, boy, did Israel ever do that. It did it in Lebanon. It did it what happened in Lebanon then had this knockoff effect on on ending the evil barbaric regime in Syria, and then they and the United States did it to Iran, and then did it to Hamas. And
But
that is an enunciation of a kind that is world altering, not just for Israel, but what lessons it teaches about how power can be used in a righteous fashion to establish new ways of thinking about the world.
it's also going to shift the game board for the nationalist right and the non-nationalist right and the future of the right in general once Trump is gone, because Trump has made a pretty clear statement about, I mean, he's not stopped talking about America first, but America with its allies first, whether that's striking Iran, whether that's backing Israel in all of these ways. And his vice president speaks about a different sort of America first and has that distance. And you know who's really angry today? People like Steve Bannon, who were kind of much more influential in the first term, but have disappeared in the second one. So that battle, what is America first? Is it the kind of isolationist, nationalist, Vance-led right? Or is it the Marco Rubio, Donald Trump, a strong presence in the world and on the global stage, America first? That battle is intriguing to me because I think there are interesting partisans on both sides of that question, and they're all jockeying for power come 2028.
And there were American hostages.
Whose bodies still
Trump's
have not been
point was
returned.
like,
yes.
America first means Americans first. There are Americans being kept in Hamas dungeons, and I'm going to go get them. That was Trump's. He said the same thing about Americans kept in Venezuela. He said the same thing about Americans kept in Russia. This was a focal point of this administration's, still, fairly young-ish second term. But this has been a focal point of this term, is not just in Israel, but Americans, bring them home where they're in trouble, bring them home and get them out of trouble. Because to be an American has to mean something. We're the superpower, and to have that, that citizenship, that connection, it has to mean something. You should walk around with your head held high as an American, and and we'll show that. So to me, the America first thing always made a lot of sense for that.
Yeah, and travel the earth unmolested.
Yeah,
that's the other central point about this, which is, and just got this researcher, this American-Israeli researcher, Elizabeth Surkoff, sprung from Iran. What's the point here? The point is, you don't kidnap Americans and take them. You don't do that. Do that, and you have no idea what I'm going to do to you. That's the crazy cowboy aspect of Trump's method to
and
Trump.
The North Korean, he had the American in North Korea in his first
Exactly.
term, whose family he brought to the State of the Union. We should also say that he was very proud in that moment to say, whatever you say about my willingness to make deals with North Korea, Russia, blah blah blah, whatever, I'm going to bring these guys home.
Deterrence requires a believable and executable threat of violence. There is no deterrence without the idea that you're making a mistake to alter the status quo relationship, where you are not at armed conflict, or you have not taken measures against the United States or whoever is going to be the deterrent. What Israel has done in the last 2 years has established a kind of deterrence that I didn't ever think was possible in the Middle East against it. I mean, there have been, over the course, my father used to say that the wars, Israel's wars, had an interesting effect on its neighbors, right? 22 countries were opposed to Israel's existence in 1948 and all declared war on it. Israel achieves parity. There's an armistice in 1949, and almost every one of the belligerents in that war that were not on their borders, that was the end of their role as an active military force against Israel. That meaning the entire Persian Gulf and various other places. So the number of enemies went down from 22 from that war, from 22 to 8 or something like that. Then in 1967, Israel wins this war, knocks Jordan out. Jordan is no longer a belligerent against Israel. In 1973, Very difficult war, almost lost. Israel knocks out Syria and fundamentally knocks out Egypt, which is neither of them become an active belligerent who is going to launch war, conventional war, from a territory. 1982 knocked out the PLO as an occupying force in southern Lebanon, which was staging conventional attacks on Israel and terrorist attacks on Israel. Here we have Israel 43 years later, having knocked out Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, Gaza, Hamas. And if you're one of those 2,000 prisoners getting out of jail today, right? You're one of the 2,000 Palestinians getting out of jail. Do you look at the beeper exercise, or do you look at the strike inside Tehran, or do you look at the fact that they hit Doha knowing where all those people were? Do you think you have freedom of movement for the rest of your life? You think they don't know where you are? You think they haven't figured out a way to keep tabs on you? I don't know what those tabs are. I don't know how it works. I do know that in the New York City subway system, there is a giant map in the control room, which I think it's still there, but was in Grand Central Station. Giant map that shows where all the subways are at any given moment. Huge city map. There are 200 different subway cars and subway trains in motion at any given moment. Shows you where they are at every given point. You think that the people who are out of that prison don't think that there is such a map at King Saul Boulevard, where the Israeli sort of like intelligence services are?
Well, also, even if there isn't such a map,
which is the Israeli military.
Even if there isn't such a map, they certainly believe there is.
Right. In other words, that's how deterrence works. Deterrence is FAFO. I'm not gonna FAFO because I have no assurance that I'm not getting it if I poke my head up. That's what has happened here, not just with countries, but with the terrorist dangers that are posed to Israel, including on the West Bank. By the way, we're going long, but I want to make one point. You're going to hear this in the next couple of days. There is a man who is still in Israeli jail. His name is Marwan Barghouti. Hamas asked that he be released as part of the prisoner release. Israel said no. You are going to hear from American liberals and some very foolish American Jews, that this is bad. They should let Barghouti go because he's the most popular Palestinian according to polling. Barghouti, and that therefore Israel is keeping the interlocutor that could help lead to a real lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians, because according to propaganda lines, Barghouti accepts the two-state solution. Barghouti is a terrorist who planned an assault on Israelis on the West Bank that either killed 26 or 5 people, depending on, he was actually convicted of the murder of 5 people. Some people say that the attack was part of a longer range attack that killed 26 people, because his line is, I accept Israel within the 1967 borders, but Jews anywhere else are fair game. I'll mow them down and eat their livers, and I don't care, and I don't respect, he wouldn't testify on his own behalf at his trial, and every single Israeli political official outside the neo-communist left has said that based on what they know about him and what he actually thinks and believes, he can never be freed. He is too dangerous, and that the dodge of the 67 border acceptance is a dodge because he fully accepts the idea that murdering Jews. And how many Jews live outside the Green Line, outside the 67 borders now? Is it 350,000. I don't even know how many there are exactly, because you would also then consider the Golan Heights as part of that, and others, and the ring city. Anyway,
It's also a movable line, like, you know,
yeah, it's a movable
as long as you say
as long as it's okay to,
settlers or
yeah,
occupiers are
yeah,
fair game, they'll move that line to wherever
yeah,
they need it. By
And
the way,
yeah,
the great Marwan Barghouti story, of course, is that in 2017 he was leading a hunger strike of Palestinians in Israeli jails, and the Israelis had cameras, and they were you know, they talked to Barghouti because he's a leader of, you know, the Palestinians, certainly in prison and whatever, and they had been feeding him, and the cameras caught him eating a candy bar, and another time eating a couple of cookies during the hunger strike. And Israel released this video. So the great Marwan Barghouti
yes,
story is that he is a fraud to you, to me, to everybody, to every side who thinks he's on their side.
right.
He's just a big fraud.
But
now
I
they
heard
did
yeah,
release, but they did, you know, some of the 2000 do. I mean, there's a guy who who organized and carried out a suicide bombing in Jerusalem that killed lots of Israelis. I mean, they
yeah.
are releasing terrible,
Oh,
horrible
it's hard,
terrorists,
and
the
yeah,
response. I just want to say the contrast between watching the Israelis receive home their civilians who have been held hostage underground for more than 2 years, and the I'm sure we can predict celebration of murderers that will occur among the Palestinian people when those prisoners go back home. That's the part that is a civilizational contrast that should always be amplified, because that's two different ways of thinking about human life and the future of your territory and the safety and security of your people. They will celebrate those murderers.
Yeah, and the
yeah,
argument the argument that Barghouti is the most popular Palestinian says everything about the problem. Like that's a
right,
very bad
yeah.
argument.
Right, it is, but like, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that yeah, he genuinely was somebody who believed in a two-state solution, or did accept Israel's existence, and did want to negotiate, and was a possible future leader after the 247-year-old dialysis kidney patient Mahmoud Abbas, who was somehow getting himself to Sharm el Sheikh in an iron lung or whatever, to sit there and do whatever it is that he's going to do to pretend that he's the leader of his people, the head of the Palestinian Authority. Let's say he was the future, and he had done these terrible things. Would you let him out of jail? Sure you would. Of course you would. Like, that's not. This is like the thing I was saying about Jamal Khashoggi. You can't let a single person govern your foreign policy, and you can't let the monstrous act of a single person 21 years ago not be something you can negotiate over if he has a genuine change of heart and really is like Sadat and really wants to alter the facts of world history on the ground. None of that is true. That is not true of him. If it were true of him, maybe that would be something that could happen. It's like the 20-point plan of Trump, which is 20-point plan will be great and fully executable when the Palestinians undergo an emotional and psychic revolution in their own heads and in their own polity that accepts that the purpose of life is not to kill Jews and destroy the Jewish state, but to make a life and future and country and land of their own where they can live and prosper. And if that happens, peace can be made in, 96 hours.
Do you know who's killing Palestinians today? Hamas. It's going
Yes.
around Gaza and murdering its own people. And do you know who doesn't want to talk about that at all? Anyone in the Western media. It's very difficult to find those stories covered at all. That's who's murdering Palestinians today. Not the IDF, not Bibi Netanyahu, Hamas.
And it's important to draw this parallel. So Hamas is going around killing off potential rivals to its, to rise up to say, you ruined us, you destroyed us, go away, go into exile. We're going to hunt you down, right? It's like killing them. It's like Michael Corleone is killing everybody off in order to make sure they don't come after him. Okay. In 1991, when we won the Gulf War, peace was negotiated. Some kind of terms of surrender or whatever were negotiated with Saddam Hussein. And at the time, there was an uprising both in the north and in the south from Kurds and from suffering Iraqis who had been his vassals to front revolt against the Ba'athist regime. And we don't know what would have happened there. But in the course of this negotiation, the very foolish General Norman Schwarzkopf, asked by Saddam for convenience in terms of managing, obviously, a country in desperate straits, if he could maintain his helicopter fleet so that his people could travel around and, help reconstitute the government. And Schwarzkopf went, sure, okay, look, we kicked the tar out of you, I'm not afraid of you. Don't worry, okay, you can have it. And those helicopter ships killed 25, 30,000 Iraqis, took them out, ended the revolt. And 12 years later, we were back in Iraq at war. So think about that in terms of what Hamas is doing today. Israel isn't going to intercede in what's going on between Hamas and the Palestinians in Gaza. It is not there to police intra-Palestinian relationships. It is there to protect Israel from Gaza. But it'll be interesting to see whether, yes, does the world rear in horror and say, Hamas, look what Hamas did, and now it's trying to slaughter its opposition while it has a chance, or its potential opposition. Yeah, you're not hearing.
Well, they even more so, they call them Israeli backed. You'll see that too in like as if the Dagmush clan in Gaza is a creation of Israel. This is the other thing that they assume that people just, and they assume correctly that people don't, this is complicated stuff, this is history, whatever. But yeah, they'll call them Israeli backed because they're not Hamas, and therefore Israel would prefer that they win. But you're really just seeing Gaza go back to this sort of clan war, situation, which is vying for control, and that's what they know, and the families going after each other, and and in the Western press you see a lot of suggestions that perhaps Israel is involved, as if this this state of being of the Palestinians in Gaza has anything to do with and the family wars and the clan wars has anything to do with Israel. But they'll always find a way to blame them. I just want to add, can I just say one thing? I know because we're running long, but I do want to say that something else about last night was that the whole nation of Israel, along with Jews all over the world, I mean, I was up, waiting for that 1 a.m. or 1:30 a.m., whenever the first, drop was of hostages, stayed up and waited to see the hostages returned. I don't know. I can't think of an analog to this. I can't think of a parallel. An entire country waiting for a few people to come home. The whole country was up. They waited in Hostage Square. They waited at the site of the Nova Festival where they did prayer services. They waited here. They waited there. Everybody, they did watch parties. The former hostages did watch parties. People did watch parties. In a couple of them were in India, and they had the screens turned on where they were in India and here and there. I mean, to see the entire nation and really the Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, that was something incredibly special. And it tells you, I think, something about why the Jews have been the eternal people. Why, as John mentioned before in about talking about Marco Rubio's speech, and all of these ancient peoples, only the Jews are left of all these ancient peoples. And, to be part of a society, to be part of a people that literally till the last man won't go to sleep until everyone is home, is something very special. You really don't see it. And I think that is, I'm proud for my kids to see the videos and stuff of that too, because I want them, I'm always trying to find ways to convey to my kids, they see there's a lot of anti-Semitism, right? And I try to counter with, well, we always survive it. We're the eternal people. Everybody else is gone. We're still here. What does that mean? I want them to be able to see that, they have this, these lights will be on for them all over the world for the entirety of their life on Earth.
That was beautifully said. And we will not have a show tomorrow, as it is the eve of Simchat Torah, but we will have one on Wednesday because we can't stay silent during this week. But thank you for that, Seth, and thank you to Christine and Abe. And I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.